Hi, I'm John, and I'm a film editor for StoryKeep. One of my favorite projects that I've worked on was editing a series of stories shared by the friends and family of a gentleman who'd been suffering from dementia. We wanted to give this gentleman a way to reconnect with friends and family and the memories he still had of them. As I worked on the edit, I heard heartfelt testimonials from so many people whose lives had been touched by this man that I really came to appreciate what a rich life he'd led. And I was especially moved by the last video in the series from his wife, which was full of detailed memories and was remarkably tender. And I took pleasure in knowing that this video would be deeply meaningful to this gentleman. If this sounds interesting for your family or one you support, please be in touch with us.
Welcome to Who We Remember. I'm Jamie Younger, the founder of StoryKeep and your host for this podcast. First, let me say how delighted I am to have you join us for the show. This is a place where we have uncommon conversations about things that matter deeply to most of us, the people we love, and the purpose we are giving to our own lives and legacies. Our mission at StoryKeep is to capitalize on the power of story for profound good in families of wealth. Since 2010, we've partnered with over 100 families worldwide, creating personal films and private podcasts that help a family navigate their shared narrative. Our work is designed to deepen connections. My conversations on this podcast center around two questions. The first, whose life story from your own family would you most want to see documented on film? And the second, what are you, as a person and as a professional, hoping to create and leave behind? Today, I'm honored to welcome Suzy Riedman. Suzy is the founder of Family Wealth Dynamics and someone who brings rare depth and heart to the world of legacy and wealth. She's both an inheritor and a guide, someone who's lived the complexity of family money from the inside and now helps others navigate it with greater clarity and compassion. With a background in real estate investment and coaching, Suzy now facilitates deep, transformative conversations within families, helping them preserve relationships and build meaning beyond the balance sheet. Suzy is here to speak about her dad, Richard Riedman. Richard was a horseman, a professor, and a quiet steward of wealth. He earned his PhD in audiology and taught at San Diego State for 30 years, despite his deep dislike of public speaking. Later in life, he returned to what he loved most, horses, the outdoors, and humble hands-on living. Diagnosed with Parkinson's in his early 70s, he remained full of joy, grit, and gentle wisdom until the very end. I love the way Suzy remembers her dad, chasing her around a soccer field with support when she didn't play her best, and cracking jokes from the back of his horse even as his health declined. And yes, even helping solve a certain barnyard mystery that may or may not have involved one of his children. Settle in for this intimate conversation with Suzy Riedman as we explore the quiet strength of her dad and how that legacy lives on in the meaningful work that Suzy does with families today. Suzy, I'm so delighted to have this time to talk with you. Thanks for joining me on the show.
Thanks, Jamie. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, I have been looking forward to talking to you about your dad, Richard Riedman, because he sounds like the kind of guy that I'd like to hang out with. And he also reminds me a little bit of my own dad. I just wanted to set it up that he was born in 1933.
Mm-hmm.
He's now passed away, and he originally is from Long Beach, California. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Tell me why when I asked of anyone in your family whose life story would you want to have documented on film, why your dad?
My dad comes to mind so easily because his life was so colorful and had so many different facets to it. And he was just the most lovable man, but not in a teddy bear kind of way, just if you understood his humor, you loved him and just wanted to be around him. I kind of like, he was a horseman and loved horses. So if you've ever been around horses and noticed that they just kind of like to come up and stand next to you and not go ride, not be brushed, nothing, just want to be close by. That's the sort of person my dad was. He was just so pleasant to be around.
Beautiful. So when you talk about all these different facets of him, I mean, what I know of him being both a businessman and also a teacher and a horseman, talk to me about those different facets of the different parts of your dad.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because he was 51 when I was born. So I only knew him later in life. But he started off as born kind of right at the in the middle of the depression really. And his dad had a ranch in Long Beach, California, and his dad was a lawyer by trade and a farmer rancher by hobby, but that was his main passion. And that's kind of the same route my dad took. He loved horses his whole life. That was his passion. But professionally, he became an audiologist. So very different worlds. He ended up he went to the University of Redlands and then San Diego State and was a professor at San Diego State for 30 years. It's funny because he did not like public speaking at all. And he always kind of laughed that that was what his career was. Being a professor, he had to speak in front of groups of people every single day. And I remember him saying that he learned to love it. And I was so impressed by that. It wasn't something that you would think when you would see my dad and meet my dad, you wouldn't think he would love that, but he trained himself to enjoy it.
And what part of audiology was he teaching about?
He taught about the inner ear, which I guess is a major part of audiology. And he also worked with kids. He did testing, hearing testing on kids. So I think he really enjoyed that. I remember as a kid getting lots of the practice tests where I would have to raise my hand when I would hear the beep. He was very good at it. And I think he really enjoyed the opportunity he had to work one-on-one with kids and do the hearing testing. Another interesting thing is that he developed a very severe hearing loss later in life, in his 50s, I think. So it's kind of like along the lines of when an oncologist gets cancer or when an audiologist develops the hearing loss. So he fully understood what was going on, but had to travel that road himself.
Wow. Did he end up having hearing aids like while you were a young kid?
Yeah.
Is that how you remember him?
Yes. Yeah. In fact, all my life, and the hearing aids were kind of humorous because they had batteries. And if the battery wasn't in quite right, it would make this high-pitched buzz. It was horrible to hear, but my dad, that was one tone that my dad couldn't hear. And so he would walk into the room and there'd be this high-pitched buzz going off. And I remember so many conversations just, Dad, your hearing aids are beeping, or Dad, your hearing aids are buzzing. And then he would put it back in. But he also utilized it a lot when he was just done socially. You'd see him just shift and pull the battery out and sit there perfectly in nice silence and enjoy the people without having to engage in the conversation.
Like literally the definition of selective hearing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
And then he had this other part of him, which was being a businessman.
Yes, so he got into real estate when he was, I'm not entirely sure what age, but when I was a kid, he had already gotten his footing in real estate where we lived in San Diego. And he did this simultaneously while he was a professor. So all of his family, we lived off of his income from work. And then he did this real estate as a way of building wealth, but not utilizing it to support our lifestyle at all. So he grew that, paid it off very quickly, and very generously gifted that to his children while he was still alive, which has been a huge part of my story and a step up in life that I got way earlier than most people are able to.
Yeah. Well, I was delighted in preparation of this to get this picture of him where he would just drive old cars and use stuff until they were sort of threadbare, I guess. Is that the picture that you would paint of him?
Yes, yes. You're getting a pretty accurate picture. Do you remember Rancheros?
Rancheros. Like the car?
Yeah, it's a car-truck combination.
It's a car. I love those things. They're so weird, but I like them.
My dad had one of those. He must have had it when it was new, long before I was born. But then when I was alive, we had this old Ranchero in the garage, and it was pretty rickety and pretty rusty, but he loved to drive that thing around. And I remember one time we were taking garage sale supplies to Goodwill or something. And on the way there, a tire blew out, and my mom was driving the Ranchero, and she ended up having to drive this real rickety thing all the way to a tire shop. When she got out, she opened the door, and the car door hit a fancy Mercedes right next to it. And the guy looked at her so angry. And then my dad just got out and smiled and pulled out his credit card and said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." And so he had this real juxtaposition between how he appeared to the world in the cars that he drove and the clothes that he wore. He was never fancy, never trying to put any airs on about him, but he had the backing to pay for whatever needed to be paid for. And whereas I feel like most people tend to put on the show for the world, we dress in a certain way to convey a certain appearance, drive fancy cars that we can't afford. And my dad was entirely the opposite, lived well below his means. And that's what he didn't care really what people saw, but whenever there was a problem with the horses, they got the best vet care. If any of his kids were sick or having issues that needed to be dealt with, we received the best care. With same thing with my mom. So the people that he cared most deeply about are the ones that benefited from what he had built. And I really respect that about him. Not many people that I see live out that value system. Even in his family, I think he was the one that did that the most.
I was really struck by, you coming into his world when he was 51. My husband, Pete, who, runs Story Keep with me, he became a dad for the second round when he was 62, I think.
Oh, wow.
So a little bit, even more.
Yeah.
But I have kind of a sense for that experience, at least from my position. And I'm just curious what memories you have from your childhood that stick out, of him being a dad. And maybe that is also because of his wisdom, his age.
Yeah, that's true. There's definitely something to be said for a mature man becoming a father because they've already lived through so much and found their own grounding. But I remember one specific instance with my dad. He had a very quiet leadership, a quiet authority in the family. He wasn't the one that I would talk to when I wasn't feeling well. That was what I did with my mom. And with this one day, I had a soccer game, and it was my dad's job to take me that day. And I had a horrible headache. I must have been 7 or 8. And I didn't tell my dad. He took me to my game, and I remember I couldn't concentrate very well. I wasn't running very fast or kicking the ball very accurately. The drive home was pretty quiet. Neither of us said much. And then when I got home, I remember my dad went upstairs and was talking to my mom, and I sat on the bottom of the stairs just sitting there listening. I spent a lot of time just sitting at the bottom of the stairs listening to my parents as a kid. And I heard my mom say, "How's Suzy doing her soccer game?" And my dad, in this kind of gruff, angry tone, said, "Bad." And that was all he said. And I was devastated. So I went outside and I cried, and my mom found me and she asked what was going on. And I told her, well, I had this headache and I didn't want to tell dad. I didn't want to complain to dad, but I was feeling so bad. And then I heard him say that I played really bad in my soccer game. And she understood. And a few minutes later, my dad came out in his tattered up barn clothes, and he just put his arm around me and said, "I'm sorry, Suzy." And to me, that's just so makes me emotional even thinking about it, because when a grown man can apologize like that, it really hits deeply, I think, especially for kids, because that taught me that there's so much strength in an apology, and that to be courageous, courageous people apologize and they own up to their mistakes, even to kids. So I, if I can keep going,
Please. Yeah.
there's a way that that relates to my life today. Just last week, I have a 6-year-old son, and he had some friends over. They went up into the woods behind our house that belong to our neighbors, and came down a few minutes later with these beautiful flowers. pulled out of the ground, roots and all. And I said, "Oh, what? This isn't, oh, those aren't ours. And you guys can't do that." And my son said, "Well, I didn't." And I said, "Well, these are your friends and they're at our house. So it was my responsibility to set the ground rules for you guys. And I didn't do that." And all of us went up and we replanted them, watered them. Hopefully they'll survive. But when the kids left, I told my son, "We need to go apologize to the neighbor." And I didn't want to. Neighborly relationships can be tough, and there's already been some things that have happened, and I really didn't want to have to do that. I thought about my dad, and I thought, I want to be brave. I want to show my son what it looks like to be brave. And so we did. We cut some roses and we took them down to her in a pretty vase. And my son really did not want to do this. But once she opened the door and I said, "We need to apologize for this. We're really sorry." And the grace that we received, "Oh, I'm so touched that you came and apologized. And I'm not mad at all. I didn't even remember I had planted those flowers." And once my son heard the grace in her voice, he was able to open up and like own his part in it also. And it ended up being such a wonderful exchange for us all. And the only reason that I'm able to do that, I think, is because what I had modeled to me from such a young age from my dad, my mom as well. I think it is in some cases harder for grown men to apologize. And I was so lucky to have a dad that could, and that I realized that that was a sign of strength.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's going to stay with me. When we first got on, I noticed right away that you have these like gorgeous photos behind you. You're in your dad's office, which is such a beautiful place to take this interview. I just wanted to dive a little bit more into his life with horses and, being around barns. And, I don't know if there are stories that come to you about that part of growing up and being, in and out of barns.
Yeah. Oh, so many. There's some that are really touchy and some that are lighthearted. I'll start with a lighthearted one. I remember my dad, he had a family similar to your situation. He had a family before mine. I'm the last of 4 kids from his second go around. In this stage of his life, he had a wife and 2 daughters. And there was a time when my sister and I are teenagers. My mom is a woman, and we're all having like woman stuff going on. And he would just disappear down to the barn where it was quiet and calm. And one day I followed him down there and I said, "Dad, what's it like living with 3 women?" And he was very quiet and calculated with his words. And he said, "Well, women have very rich emotional lives." And he didn't say anything mean. That's just the observation he made. And then I looked around at the barn that he was hanging out in, the horses quiet and calm, and I realized no wonder this is what he has to have, this to center himself and to ground himself in this current stage of life. And there were also just so many times that Dad and I would spend cleaning the barn. His job as a child had been sweeping his family's barn, sweeping with a big broom all the manure into the corners. See, this is something that I think everybody that has horses and barns does, is sweep manure into the corners of the stalls. But it was, I think, very specific to my dad, and he took great pride in how it was done, how clean it would get, how he would lift up the mats and sweep under the mats. So Dad and I would spend a lot of time down there sweeping, raking the manure into the wheelbarrow, and having the best conversations about horses and life. That season of time that I got to spend with him down there, I really remember relating how he parented us to how he trained horses. And then I also was able to relate that to, I believe in God, and I just thought this is very similar to how God must feel about us, is how parents feel about kids, or how my dad works with the horses. There's this just such a tender love that we were able to share in those settings.
From just the things that he would share with you and how he would talk.
Yeah. Then the togetherness, just the quiet together time.
Beautiful. Later in his life, he was suffering from Parkinson's. I don't know how many years that lasted. but you had shared with me earlier that the two of you, when he had Parkinson's, actually went on a horse ride together. And I was wondering if you could tell that story.
Yeah. So when he was diagnosed with Parkinson's in his early 70s, I believe, and he died at 85. So the first 7 or 8 years weren't terrible, and the last got pretty hard. But he rode up until maybe 6 months before he died, and I had moved home. I had lived in Hawaii for a while and then moved home after his diagnosis and helped him take care of the horses, but we made it a priority to ride together on our property often. And there was this one ride I remember going on. My dad was pretty advanced in his disease at this point, and he had a friend. He was in a Parkinson's support group, and this friend had just chosen death with dignity, which is allowed in Oregon where we live. And my dad, I think that made him think a lot. I think there was a big part of him that would like to choose that also because his life was slipping away from him in such a difficult way. And so he watched his friend go through this. And we were back in the woods behind our house, those same woods where the flower was pulled out of. And there's this opening, and the sun was shining, a little meadow, and the sun was shining down, and it was a beautiful spring day, and it just felt so good to be sitting there on the horses. They were grazing calmly, and we were just sitting quietly, and my dad said, "Frank is missing this." And I could see that in his mind, he was so happy to be alive so that he could experience this moment. And that just impressed me so much because his body was in so much pain. He couldn't move the way he used to. He had the dementia that goes along with Parkinson's, and it was pretty advanced. His hearing loss was severe, and he could see and receive the goodness of the simplest moments. So we rode home and had a nice ride, but that memory sticks with me and reminds me that when life is really hard, there's these like fingers of sunshine coming through the trees, and they can touch us no matter what we're going through. Yeah.
Mm. Suzy, thank you for that gorgeous image and gorgeous story. I'm curious, we're talking about his life, but also the idea that of having the opportunity to record it, right? In our imaginations, he's now passed. But I'm curious what you would, if you had the opportunity to ask him questions or work with a company like StoryKeep to have us ask him questions, like what would be on the top of your list of like, these are the things I really want to have my dad speak to?
I would love that on a business side. Right now, I'm in a stage of my life where I'm trying to grow and really excited about business. And I never really got to have those talks with my dad. When he died, I was in my early 30s. And by the time I got interested in it, his mind wasn't able to comprehend what I wanted to ask him. But if I could be back with him when he was very sound, I would want to talk to him about business in a lot of ways. We had so many incredible discussions about life, philosophical questions that I'm lucky I got so many of those with him. But I'd like some practical advice from him. I never really took the time or cared when he was trying to offer it to me. I remember him trying to teach me how to use a check register when I was a teenager, and it was so boring, and I did not like it. It worked, but I'd like to just go back to the check register time and ask him a little bit more about how he thought about money, what his philosophy around debt was, what his philosophy around growth, what his philosophy around giving to his children, and how much to share and how much not to share in conversation with them.
Yeah, I can well imagine. And he probably would have a lot to share there, right? Um, and what else kind of springs to mind, like if he just walked in the room right now? By the way, did he wear a cowboy hat?
He did. Yeah, he always wore a cowboy hat. I almost grabbed one. Instead, I grabbed his cowboy boots.
Oh, oh my gosh, thank you for sharing that. This is amazing.
Yeah, and I don't think that they've been cleaned since he wore them in the barn last, so they're the real deal. Yeah, he always wore a cowboy hat. He wore jeans, Levi's that he'd had, I think, his whole life and had holes in them and would patch them, and a plaid shirt, threadbare plaid shirts that he had his whole life in his cowboy boots, and he'd always put on his barn clothes to go to the barn. And when he'd come home, he'd always switch into his daytime clothes, and then he'd switch back into his barn clothes to go back to the barn. And I think it really drove him crazy because I go to the barn in my shorts and flip flops and a t-shirt, and he just didn't understand, but he let me be. I think of myself more as a California beach horsewoman than a actual rancher.
Yeah. Right, right, right. So if he walked in with his cowboy boots on and his cowboy hat on and his threadbare shirts, what else would you want to ask him today besides business?
Gosh, there's so many things. I would like to ask him what the real highlights of his life were, looking back over his life, what meant the most, and if he could spend more time in doing certain things, what would he spend his time doing? I'd like to ask him the opposite, like, what did you spend time doing that wasn't worth it? I'd like to understand more about the hardest seasons of his life and what he learned during those times and what he would have done differently if he could. I know divorce is never easy, and I don't know a lot about his divorce, but I'd be interested in learning more about that now that I'm married and go through the ups and downs of married life. I would love to be able to glean some of his wisdom from what it meant to be married and what he learned through his marriages.
Yeah. It seems that your dad's life has so organically and richly woven into your personal life, but it sounds like also your professional life. And at this point, you're working with mostly inheritors who are trying to kind of balance their own personal identity and their relationship with their larger family, unit and all the dynamics that happen there. And I'm wondering what values you feel like were instilled in you that live out in the work that you do.
Yeah, this is a great opportunity for a good story that has a value attached to it that I use very much in my work today. So, this is when my dad was somewhat advanced in his Parkinson's and dementia. So, his mind wasn't entirely sound like it had been years before. So, just keep that in mind. I was recently married. My husband and I lived on a neighboring property so that we could help take care of my dad and so that I could take care of the horses. I remember we had just gotten a little puppy. Her name was Lady, and my husband and I went over to the barn in the morning to take care of the horses, to clean the manure. And because Lady was so little, we put her in this side room called the ping pong room. And ping pong is really good for Parkinson's therapy, and my dad kept a couple ping pong tables in there. So we put Lady in the ping pong room, closed the doors, finished our chores, got Lady, took her back. And later that day, we came back, and my dad was in the ping pong room, and he saw my husband and I walking up, and he came out with this really confused look on his face, and he looked at me, and he said, he said, "Susie, did you poop in the barn?" And I said, "No, Dad, I didn't." And I was, the fact that he asked me, I thought was pretty funny. And then he looked at my husband and he said, "Did you poop in the barn?" And then my husband said, "No." And he said, "Well, maybe it was your sister." And just kind of was thinking about it. And then he said, "Huh, maybe it was me." And then we put it all together. My husband and I realized, oh, Lady had pooped in there in the morning and we hadn't seen it because it was in a corner. And so my dad found Lady's poop and thought that maybe I had or Chris had, and then he considered maybe I did. Huh. Yeah. And he wasn't upset about it. He was just amused by it. But that thought of maybe it was me is something that I bring back to my life and I try to communicate to my clients is when you're dealing with family dynamics, when you're dealing with conflict with anybody, when you're dealing with conflict even within yourself, if you can step back and humor yourself and ask, maybe it was me. Was it me? Like, what part do I play in this? Taking the blame off of somebody else and putting the responsibility on yourself in a gracious way is, I think, the best diffuser for conflict before you try to have the conversation with someone else. It's a great way to remember it.
It really, truly is.
Yeah.
I will not share this story, but I am now bringing this into my mind about something that happened earlier today in my own life going, yeah, that's a good way. It helps to bring some humor, right? To like things that can feel so heavy,
Yes. Yes.
especially around blame,
Yeah.
or yeah,
Yeah.
responsibility. Um,
Can I say one more thing there?
yeah, please.
That's one thing that I think my dad did so brilliantly throughout all of his life was not take himself too seriously and find the humor in things that other people might take very seriously and be very worried about. He could find humor in, and especially as he went through his Parkinson's disease, he had such a big help from my mom, being so much younger than he was, and she's very well versed in the medical community field and involved in the community. So she made sure he received the best care possible and took great care of him herself. But he was the one that had to have the disease. And I remember him saying that he was chosen for this, deciding to believe that he had been chosen to face this, that it was a unique challenge that he was uniquely equipped to handle. And the courage I think that it takes to face a diagnosis like that, that's so long and so devastating and so unknown, is just amazing to me. And part of his medications would often cause him to hallucinate. And so around the property, there are hats hanging on sticks in places, or there's a tarp hanging over a pile of wood. And these to him became people. There were people all over the property, and he called them the Roma, the wandering people that would exist in his life that no one else could see. And I remember one day we were at the barn. I walked up behind him and he was having an intense conversation with the back of the tractor. There were these two headlights on the back. And I said, Dad, what's going on? And he said, well, this guy's in charge and this is his helper. And they want to drive the tractor, but they need to sign a liability form. And they won't listen to me. Can you talk to them? And I said, okay, I will. And so I talked to the headlights and I said, you guys need to sign a liability form. And can you make sure that happens? So I made sure it happened. But even that, he could see, he wasn't sure if this was real or not, but it was very real to him. And he was able to go in and out of these hallucinations with so much grace and humor. That's something that really stuck with me and that I want to face aging with that same grace.
Yeah. And I can imagine that the approach of, difficult times with a lot of humor is probably really helpful in your work that you do with different clients because things can feel very tense and very serious at times. What for you, Suzy, is the most meaningful part of your work right now, working with inheritors?
I love to see someone who is in a similar place that I was 10 or 15 years ago, confused about who they are in their family. They have this money that they didn't earn themselves, and yet it's theirs and they can utilize it for their life. And I love coming into their lives and having them share with me what's really going on, what's it really like to not know whether you need to ever make a living for yourself, whether you ever need to make, like, do you need to become what your parents were? Can you take this and enjoy it? Or do you have to take it and grow it? Or do you have to just pretend it's not there and create something all of your own? Those are questions that the most inheritors can't talk to many people about because it's such a fortunate position, but it's also such a heavy position. So I love being a place where they can come and release the weight, have someone that's been there to talk through and guide them through it. And just to see the growth that happens in them and the ownership they start taking of their life and their decisions, it makes me so happy.
Yeah. And to feel like you're helping that person on the path where you've been able to successfully get to. I mean, of course, we're always growing and, continuing on our own path.
Yeah.
But that's a beautiful guidance to be a guide in a
Yeah.
certain way.
Yeah, exactly.
I know you're not an old woman. You're in your middle years of your life. You have young children. And I'm wondering at this point, what you are sort of hoping to create in your lifetime and the legacy that you leave behind. I know that you have a book coming out, and I'd love to have you talk about that. And I don't know if that's part of the legacy you're hoping to leave is some of your writings.
Yeah. I studied creative writing in college and I have yet to publish anything. So at this stage in my life, as with a young son, it feels like I have so many opportunities for stories as I watch him go through what I remember going through. And when I relate it to this world of wealth that I have clients going through with their kids and that I'm raising my son in that context also, I decided to create a book series. I have two that I've done so far that are in the process of publishing, but there will be more because there's so many topics. But a big part of what I want to leave behind is how families can navigate generational wealth in a way that sets each generation up for success rather than failure. I think there's so much fear that parents have that this money will destroy their kids, but that doesn't have to be that way. A lot of parents want to follow that advice that Warren Buffett gives. I'll give you enough to do anything, but not so much to do nothing. I think that's really great advice. But for the kid that's going through it, how did they navigate that? And how do you start communicating what the purpose of this generational wealth is for them from a young age so that as they can grow into it rather than be handed it and then be told, well, do something, but don't do nothing. What do you do with that? So they have to be trained up. And I'm hoping that these children's books can be the start of conversations that families that are raising kids within wealth can start these conversations 5, 6, 7, 8, talking about money, talking about what does it mean to be rich? Is it about the money that we have or is it about something else? Um, are your friendships true or are your friends because they like that you have horses and they like that you have a big house or they like that you always buy them things? Those are questions I think that parents can start talking to their kids about so that they're more prepared when money does come to handle it and to know how to be with it.
Well, I signed up
Oh, good. Thank you.
for your pre-sale of your book. I'm very excited to see it. The characters are Billy and
Bobby.
Bobby.
Yes. In the first
Okay.
book, it's Bobby and Billy. Bobby is loosely based off my son. Um, and they're these two boys on opposite ends of the socioeconomic spectrum that are best friends and navigating that together.
And there's illustrations.
Yes. Yeah, that's what's so neat about children's books. They're not long. They're easy to take in, and parents, I feel like parents can get so much out of them too when they read them to their kids, and the illustration speaks so much more. I mean, the words plus the illustration are what really tell the story.
Indeed. Yeah, we were just reading a book to our daughter, or Pete was reading a book to her while I was kind of overhearing them read it. And it was such a deep book. I was like, oh, both of us were like, well, that's a good reminder for us.
Yeah, exactly. And is your daughter 6 also?
She's 5.5. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
going on 6.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's such a fun age to what they're learning through these books is really pertinent to the parents as well. I've felt the same way many times.
Yeah. It's profound. I'd like to leave our listeners and you and me with a scene. So we're still in imagination land of your dad, and I don't think you have this footage captured literally, but we're going to create it here together in our minds. If you had 30 seconds of film footage of your dad, can you paint a picture of what we would be seeing in that footage as kind of our final scene here together, Suzy?
Can I put up some pictures? Because I feel like these okay.
Oh, please do. I mean, people have to come to the video version of this.
Okay. I'll just
These will also be on your podcast episode page. So if you're listening in audio, go to Suzy's podcast episode page and you'll be able to see these images as well. So,
okay. I'll describe them.
yeah, please.
But I think both of these, this one is you can see it.
Mhm.
My dad's standing at a lake in the mountains in the high Sierras, which is one of his favorite places to be. And then this is him on a horseback trip in Arizona with a bunch of other men, just laying on the side of the mountain eating his lunch. reclined on the side of the mountain. This is how I would paint the picture of him. He's in his Levi's. He has a cowboy hat on. There's no pretense about him. He's outside in the mountains, and there's nothing more that needs to be done. I remember him saying that a lot, is that if he was on the top of a mountain, he felt like he had accomplished everything he needed to for the day. There was nothing else that needed to be accomplished. And that's really how I visualize him, as so content outside in the vastness of this incredible world.
Suzy, thank you for sharing your dad with me and with the listeners and painting such beautiful, vivid pictures of him. And it's so right that you are also bringing stories and images to life in the books that are coming out. Thank you so much for this conversation. I've really, truly enjoyed talking to you, and I look forward to getting the book pretty soon.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's such an honor to be able to share about somebody so special. And the fact that you have a platform to do this means a lot. Thank you.
Yeah. Until soon.
Okay.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Who We Remember. If you enjoyed this, I invite you to subscribe. When you subscribe, a new episode will pop up automatically in your favorite listening platform every 2 weeks. You can see some great photos related to today's story, as well as find out more about our guests and their work. Just go to storykeep.com/podcast. Who We Remember is a production of StoryKeep. StoryKeep works with exceptional individuals and families to document their life stories and histories through films and private podcasts. You can learn more about our services at storykeep.com.